So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our worship. It's very good to be with you all once again. Thank you for inviting me back to Newcastle and to take a service in this beautiful building of yours. It's nearly a year since I was last with you in person. Excuse me. Although I think I've conducted at least one Zoom service for you in the meantime. I know you've experienced both types of services and the hybrid ones at one time or another during the past 2 years, whilst you prepare to complete the sale of these premises, take your place in the newly refurbished Turner Hall, which will become your permanent home, and make your arrangements for future changes. I wish you the very best of luck in the process during the next few weeks and months, and I look forward to hearing more about your progress with your sale. The theme of this morning's service is kindness. We'll be using the purple hymn book, Sing Your Faith, throughout today. And just thinking about the subject of kindness, I came across 4 examples just recently. The hotel where we're staying has a kindness policy. It hopes that everything it provides will please and satisfy its customers. I don't think they include overnight roadworks, though, with that. Yesterday, when we visited Blyth, there was a marathon in progress in aid of Man for Health, which meant that runners and supporters were freely giving their time and energy to a worthwhile project. And at Blyth Crematorium, we saw many graves lovingly and kindly tended in order to remember family and friends with words, flowers, and other mementos. And just as we arrived in your little car park over there, notice under the chalice I found the words, "Be the kindness." So I'm hoping all these are good omens. So I'll light the chalice candle now. I think striking a match is always a big ordeal for me, so we'll see how it goes. For me, that's not bad going. And so this morning's chalice words. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole. May we keep the flame of truth burning brightly among us, and by its light find the treasure within that is courage, wisdom, and loving kindness. And now let us enter into a time of prayer. God of our hearts, in an imperfect world, may we go out as sheep among wolves, as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Help us to be trusting, but not gullible, open-hearted, but not empty-headed, ready to think the best, but prepared for the worst. May we never become hardened against the humanity of others, especially those who are themselves the victims of deceit and exploitation, those who have never learned the better way. Help us to be kind, even as we stand firm against the human instruments of malice and evil, remembering always the prayer of Jesus, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Amen. Before I move on to this service's story for all, I omitted, and I'm sorry, to thank Diana for her help with arranging this service, Dave for the music, and everybody else who's contributed, all of you for being here, Louise for doing the technical support, and so on. So this story is, I've called it Kathy's Concert. You'll see why in a moment. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Kathy who lived with her mother in a modest house in the middle of a small town. Kathy's mum worked hard, but there wasn't usually a great deal of money to spare. After all the bills had been paid, they weren't left with much. One thing that was always paid for, though, was Kathy's Saturday dancing class. For Kathy loved dancing. Wherever she was, she danced. In the house, in the street, on her way to school, always whirling and twirling around. And her mother used to say to her sometimes, "Kathy, can't you just sit still for 5 minutes?" One day, Kathy arrived back from her class full of excitement. "Mum, Mum," she shouted, "there's going to be a dancing class concert and I'm going to dance a solo." "That's fantastic, Kathy," her mum said. "Well done." There was no stopping Kathy that day. She danced around talking non-stop about the concert and her solo, and by bedtime she was exhausted. So was her mum, who was longing for a little peace and quiet. But not long after Kathy had gone to bed, the phone rang. It was the dancing class teacher wanting to talk about the concert. She filled in all the details for Kathy's mum and ended by saying, "Of course, Kathy will need a new dress and matching shoes, but I'll leave that with you." Once the call ended, Kathy's mum sat down in a chair, put her head in her hands and cried. She knew she couldn't afford the dress and shoes that Kathy needed, but she didn't know how she was going to tell the teacher that, and she most certainly had no idea what she was going to say to Kathy. The next day was Sunday, and Kathy's mum set off for work, leaving Kathy at the next door neighbours as usual. It was a beautiful day. The sky was blue and the sun was shining. Kathy's mum worked hard all morning, and at lunchtime she decided to take her sandwiches outside. She found a bench in the nearby gardens and had only just settled herself on it when a young man rushed up to her, pushed an envelope into her hands and said, "This is for you." Then he looked at her and added, "Oh, it's the lady from the supermarket, isn't it? The one with the lovely smile." And with that, he dashed off. Kathy's mum was very surprised. She sat for a while turning the envelope over and over in her hands. And when she finally opened it, she found £50 in notes inside it. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what she used the money for, but suffice it to say that a few weeks later, Kathy was the star of the show at the dancing class concert in her new matching dress and shoes. Our reading today comes in 2 parts. The first part is an anecdote that you may well have heard before, but the point is worth making again, I think, in the context of this service. A house was up for sale. One day, a prospective buyer went to view it, and having done so, he spoke to a man across the road. "What are the neighbours like around here?" he asked. "What are they like where you live now?" came the reply. "Dreadful, miserable and grudging, wouldn't give you the time of day." "I expect the neighbours here are much the same." A few days later, another viewer visited, asked the same question, and received the same response. But this viewer said, "My neighbours are wonderful people, so helpful and kind, a pleasure to be with." He was told, "I expect you will find the neighbours here much the same." A reminder that our own behaviour and attitudes provoke reaction. If we are bad-tempered and grumpy, others may well respond in the same way. But if we smile pleasantly, the response will be considerably more cheerful. We can do so much to improve our relationships with others. And secondly, a reading which illustrates further how seemingly small, unimportant actions can impact on the lives of others. This is a piece written by the Reverend Brenda Catterall, former minister at our Chowbent Church in Lancashire, and it's called "I Come in the Little Things." Sometimes, when we feel at our lowest ebb, our lives are touched by a happening or gesture that comes like the rainbow after the storm. A few years ago, I woke to discover that my house had been ransacked by burglars while I and my young daughter Sophie slept. Thankfully, We had not been aware of the unwelcome visitors helping themselves to our property and then driving away in my car. As I waited for the police to arrive, I received a phone call from the hospital to tell me that my much-loved aunt had died. It was all too much. We spent anxious nights feeling distraught and worrying that the burglars would return. A few days later, I went to the hospital to take Sophie to the dental department to have an orthodontic brace fitted. We spent 4 hours sitting in a packed and chaotic hospital department. Sophie was eventually called in to have the brace fitted and took in with her a small teddy bear to give her courage. As we drove home, Sophie, still clutching the bear, said, "Oh no, Teddy's hat is missing." I told her there was no chance of finding the tiny hat now, and she sat silently for the rest of the trip home, upset at her loss. 2 days later, an official-looking envelope arrived with Sophie's hospital number on it. I opened it to see when her next appointment was, but there was no appointment card and no message, just a small plastic denture bag containing Teddy's hat, a 1-inch piece of wool. I wept at this overwhelming gesture from a busy nurse in an overstretched hospital department who had made a child happy and restored my faith in human nature. The words of the novelist and mystic Evelyn Underhill kept going through my mind. "I come in the little things, saith the Lord." Let us now enter into a time of prayer again, after which there'll be a short meditation. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we ourselves are pardoned. Teach us how to practice loving kindness, how to help to relieve the suffering of others, and how to see others' joy as our own. And let us reflect for a few moments in silence on our own kindness and on ways in which we might use it to create a better world. If you think back to the children's story and the readings we shared earlier, you'll realise that they all reinforce the theme of today's service, kindness. The story, although it was fictional, was inspired by a true occurrence, experienced by one of my daughter's friends. She had just lost her brother, and she and her mother were discussing his funeral. They wanted something special, which was going to cost extra, and they didn't see how they could afford it. As they stood talking outside the supermarket, a man approached them, gave them an envelope containing £50, said, "This is my random act of kindness for today," and disappeared from sight. The two women were touched by this gesture, as was I when I learned about it. And since then, I've been thinking about random acts of kindness and wondering exactly what they were. The phrase random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty was coined by Ann Herbert, a Californian, in 1982. It imitated common newspeak of the time, random acts of violence and senseless acts of cruelty, and sought to present a much more positive, humanitarian point of view, aimed at increasing kindness worldwide. Its roots may go further back than that, however. The Jewish word mitzvah means a good deed or act of kindness, and Judaism teaches that the world is built on kindness. The Mosaic, The coming of the Messiah will occur sooner, they believe, if people practice goodness and kindness in their daily lives. Today, there are well over 3,000 members called Ractivists of the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation in 87 countries. They belong to an organisation which is internationally recognised, non-profit making, founded on a powerful belief in kindness, and dedicated to providing resources and tools that encourage acts of kindness. A World Kindness Day, held on November 13th each year, was introduced in 1998. In New Zealand, a Random Act of Kindness Week, beginning on September 1st, was started by Josh Jeong. In the UK, a special Random Acts of Kindness Day was held on February 17th this year, and a special week starting on that same date is definitely gaining in popularity. A random act of kindness is defined as a selfless act performed by a person or group to assist others by being kind, thoughtful, complimentary, or helpful. Such acts can be performed at any time and may benefit giver and receiver alike. The act can change a person, may change others, and could thus change the world. An act of kindness, once received, may inspire the recipient in turn to pass on the deed, a sort of ripple effect. I have discovered that there are lists of hundreds of types of kindnesses that would qualify as suitable. What people choose to do will depend on their inclination or imagination, and sometimes on the state of their finances. A random act of kindness could consist of something as simple as a decision to smile at people on the way to work, in the street, or wherever they happen to be. Or it might mean sending a card, a thank you note, or flowers to a deserving person, or to someone who needs cheering up, or holding a door open, or giving up a seat on the bus, or cooking a meal for a homeless person. These days, it might include, in the right circumstances, people offering their homes to misplaced Ukrainians. One example that has particularly interested me is a scheme that originated in working-class cafes in Naples called Caffè Sospeso, literally suspended coffee. Anyone lucky enough to have money to spare pays for 2 cups of coffee, drinks only one, and leaves the price of another one for someone else to claim free later. What a beautifully simple idea. Another example, and this is where the healthy bank balance comes in, is that of Canadian investment banker Keith Owen, who died of lung cancer in 2013. He willed his £2.3 million fortune to Sidmouth Civic Society to be spent on flowers to keep the town looking beautiful.